Well, hello everyone. It's so nice to see you, and it's such a pleasure to be here to talk about one of my favorite people, your father, Bob. I've known Bob for a long time. We were on committees together, on projects together. He would fix you with a look. It was sort of terrifying. And after a while, we became good friends. We were on a commission in Cleveland Heights. Bob was the chair. Whenever he would call for a vote, he would do that look up and down the line of the commissioners. This is the Planning Commission in Cleveland Heights. And he'd say, "Is there any unreadiness?" And I've never forgotten it. And I have always thought of Bob as someone who was so ready, which is what he just said in that film too. He was ready to take all these steps. He was ready to put himself on the line. He was ready to be a mentor and a leader. He was ready to sacrifice a lot of things in his life to move our world forward. So the other thing that I think of with Bob is what he just said, why? Like why? And Jean is here to answer some of the whys because Bob isn't here with us tonight. This idea came from Bob's book. So Bob wrote a book, Designing Victory. It chronicled his career. I thought I knew an awful lot about his career. I didn't. And I didn't appreciate the nuances or the not so nuanced obstacles that he overcame in his life. So that was kind of the beginning of it. And you know, if you read a book about somebody, excuse me, and you're thinking about making an exhibit, you think, what could there possibly be that we could show in this exhibit? And between the Madison family and Robert P. Madison International and the various iterations of the firm, we were able to find some wonderful things out there. So I'm not going to talk too much about what is out in the gallery because you can see that for yourself. There are just some amazing things. As a curator of an exhibit, when you go into an office or a home and you see something, you're like, whoa. And I was with Kevin Madison the day I went down to the old office and I said, can I borrow this? Oh, sure. Can I borrow this? Oh, sure. When I got to the rendering of the U.S. Embassy in Dakar, that's when I felt like I had really hit the jackpot. And when I met Bob back at the house and saw the Purple Heart and said, could we ever borrow the Purple Heart? And he said, of course you could borrow the Purple Heart. All I've bought since then are those Purple Heart commemorative stamps. Go out and buy some more of them. They're just beautiful. So everything in there tells an aspect of Bob's life. We're here tonight to talk about him and to talk about his work. And it's such a pleasure to be with you, Jean. I'm an oldest child. I know how this is. We kind of carry the, what do we say, the burden, or we carry the torch of being the first people in our family and being awfully close to our parents. We remember things that our younger siblings don't remember. And you've lived through a lot of your dad's career. So I'm going to hand it over to you for remarks, and then we'll just start talking about some of these topics.
Well, thank you, Kathy. I'm very glad to be here today. My dad was not feeling well, so I'm going to try to represent him. I don't hope to fill his shoes, but I will try to give you as much of a feel for him as I can. I have notes which he gave me, so I hope you will give a good report if you see him. I do want to thank Kathy Barry and her husband Dennis and the Barry Group for this fine exhibit. We're very excited about that. I wanted to thank the Alumni Association for having us, Bradford Cruise, and Summer Cantor for their support and information throughout this process. I think it's important to note that we have 3 generations of Case Western Reserve University graduates. My father would insist that he's a Western Reserve University graduate. We have 7 degrees in our family from this university. My dad in 1948, architecture. My late Uncle Stanley, who graduated from the medical school in 1960 under racial quotas. I graduated in 1975, and my dad was a trustee at the time I graduated, which was a kind of poetic justice for the refusal he had gotten when he tried to apply. I came back in '97 and got my executive MBA, so I did my undergraduate work in Mather, and I came back 20 years later and right across the street. And then we have two cousins who graduated in 2014 and 2017, children of first cousins. We're not alone in African American families that have multiple graduates with multiple degrees from this university. I see heads nodding. There are a number of us. There's a book in the archives that was written by Gwendolyn Johnson that chronicles all of the families. I see more head nodding. I'd also like to recognize my cousin Kevin and his wife Sandra Madison, who have taken over the firm Robert P. Madison International. We're very excited that this will be the next generation, and they have a daughter, Maya Madison, who's a practicing architect in New York. So we are hoping for the fourth generation to take over the firm. That's pretty much the preamble that I have. I worked here also from 2000 to 2004, and I understand this Dean of the School of Dentistry is here. The program Healthy Smiles in the Cleveland Schools is my program. I worked with the dean then, Dr. Lala Mondier, Dr. Francis Curd, and at that time it was an assistant dean, Jeff Jefferson, who helped me. So I'm very proud of that program. I saw James Wingo at the Art Museum recently, and he was my contact at the Cleveland Schools. So very pleased that children in the second grade are getting their teeth examined by our dental school students, and if they have caries, I think they're still brought up to university hospitals, pediatric dental clinics. So thank you, Dean, for keeping that going. Kathy.
Okay, I'm going to jump right in here.
Absolutely.
Your dad, I mean, I was so struck going through these things. His yearbook page from East Tech, he's in the architecture club. His was the only black face. And what was it like for him to be in the situations that he was from high school? Then he went to Howard, where he felt more at home, I'm sure. And then he met your mother, Leatrice, who I was very lucky to know, the most beautiful, lovely lady, and what partners they were. Then the war came, and he went, he was part of the Italian campaign, and he was injured by shrapnel in 1945. He was severely injured, and he was so lucky he was near a field hospital where they were able to stem pretty severe injuries that he had. So he came home quickly after that, and he came home with his Purple Heart and his battle ribbons, which are out in the case in the exhibit. Real treasures for us to be able to show here. When the war was over, he came back and he wanted to finish his degree in architecture, and so he decided to go for an interview with the the dean of the School of Architecture, and I'll let you take it from there.
So my father's often told this story, and many of you have heard it, but he came to Case Western Reserve to apply to the School of Architecture. And he was told in no uncertain terms, in the language that was used at the time, that we've never had an N-word here and we won't. He was a very determined man. He went home, he put on his military uniform with his patches and his Purple Heart, and he came back and he shared with the dean that he had shed his blood in Italy, and he intended to use his GI Bill of Rights and go to Case Western, well, it was Western Reserve University at the time, and he did. While he was here, he was determined to graduate in 2 years, and according to the curriculum, it would have taken him longer. So what he did was he had a very interesting strategy. He enrolled in the classes he was supposed to take, but at night he was also studying the other courses that he wouldn't have been able to take until 2 or 3 years later. And apparently he would sleep in class because he was so tired from all this studying. But he went to the professors of these different courses and asked if he could take the final exam as a practice, just as a practice. So the professors said sure, because they had no expectations of him graduating. He took the exam and he scored higher than any of the students that had been there for the whole semester. So they let him pass that. Then he tells this very interesting story, and I don't know the names of the architects, my cousins might, but he was supposed to take the history of architecture with the dean of the school. And he went to the dean and he said, Dean, I really want to take your class, but I'm wondering what your opinion is about the gates of paradise on the Cathedral of Florence. And he asked about 2 different architects. because when he was in Italy, he took advantage of everything. He went to La Scala, to the opera, he learned to ski in the Alps, and he toured all the historic buildings that he had studied at Howard. So the dean heard this and said, "You don't have to take my class." So he got out in 2 years, and then he started his own firm in 1954. And I asked him, "Why did you start your own firm?" He said no one would hire him. He worked for a year for Robert Little, who was a professor here. He was fascinating to me because he was a direct descendant of Paul Revere. And then he went on to design many of the buildings along with my cousins and some over 150 people that had worked for him from 37 different countries, representing 5 major religions of the world. And some of those buildings are represented out in the exhibit, so I encourage you to take a look. And when you go out, go around the corner because there's a lot of pictures there as well. Thanks to Kathy and Dennis.
And your dad,
Okay.
who would call up and say, "I found a few more things, I'll bring them over." So he's 98,
Yep.
and I'd say, "Oh, no, I'll come get them." And he'd say, no, I'll bring them over. And bring them over he would. And so it really was a collaboration working with him. And he was so thoughtful about wording. So the wording that is on the captions that are on the panels and the labels, those were all Bob approved with Bob recommendations where he'd say, "That's not quite the right word. We've got to get to the word that's more accurate." Mm-hmm. So as a collaborator, he's one of the most intelligent and generous and not picky people. He really went for the big stuff, which was such a delight. So we fast forward from the early days of his architectural practice, where he went out on his own. Also in the exhibit are some brochures from the firm, which was called Robert Madison, then it was called Madison, then it was called Madison and Madison, as he joined with one of his brothers, and then it was called Madison, 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 as the other brother came in. And we had an editor was looking over the label copy, and she's like, "This is wrong." And I said, "No, it is not wrong. And Bob will fight you tooth and nail on getting that there are no commas in there." And then Robert P. Madison International. So you'll see those out there too. That sets the ground for this architectural practice. Bob talked about the embassy in Dakar. And, you know, I think one thing that was so striking to me is the design projects he was very proud of, where he was the lead design. He studied with Walter Gropius. His drawing pencils are out there in the case. He was a fantastic design architect. And given the time and the day, he didn't get too many of those jobs, but he got some of them. And what he did get was a really important job in so many major projects in this city, and that's the role of the associate architect. This is the person that makes sure that all the trades are happy, that all of the drawings, that all of the things that have to go on after a building is designed get done properly. And he is very proud of those. Those are just wonderful. So, in between, what's he doing? Well, in 1969, which must have been a really fun time to become a trustee of any university, like, can you imagine? And here also, he became the first Black trustee of Case Western Reserve. Stayed on the board, visiting committees, overseers, pretty much throughout his career, and is still an emeritus trustee and was given an honorary degree and named various awards. So I'll let you talk about your dad's prizes and awards.
Well, thank you. Yes, he did study with Walter Gropius. He also was friends with I.M. Pei. They had toured China with an American delegation before the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And he worked with Caesar Pelli for a short period of time, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So my cousins would probably have to define the role of the associate architect, but he was awarded the Distinguished Alumni Award in 2019 and awarded an Honorary Doctor of Science. He has 5 honorary doctorates, but I think the one from Reserve, as he would call it, is very special to him because of his experiences here. Because, you know, my dad came along under segregation, where the highest educational experience you would have would be Howard, unless you broke out of that mold like some did and went to Harvard or other schools. So I think that given what he had gone through to get that first degree, getting that honorary degree meant an awful lot to him. He was very proud of that. As a trustee, and bear in mind, the university was started in 1826, you all may know that, but in 1875, Western Reserve University started graduating African Americans. So in the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of unrest on college campuses. At the time my dad was made trustee, the university also had the first Jewish provost, Herman Stein, who went on to become the archivist at the university. He was really cool. His brother was a producer on Broadway and taught me that fourth row aisle is the most choice seat. But at that time, the university didn't have a lot of African American students. Stephanie Tubbs Jones was here at the time. She started with others the African American Society. They had a big protest march down Euclid Avenue, protesting the lack of diversity on campus. They took over the administration building and encircled the trustees' meeting. And Dad has shared with me they weren't sure what was going to happen, because I don't know how much you all remember about the 60s, but there was a whole lot of stuff going on. And my dad, Bob Morris, and Herm Stein met with the students, understood their demands for more African American students who were qualified, because if you were going here, you were definitely qualified. More African American faculty, and senior level administration, and more outreach to the community. So they did a lot to make those things happen. My father and Stephanie remained friends until her death. My dad and my mother both were very committed to education. I think our whole family is. And my parents established a scholarship for African American students in architecture. It's at the Cleveland Foundation, the Robert P. Madison Scholarship for Architecture. So yes, education has been a strong commitment in the family.
So today we're here with all of you alums and alumni, and we're here to kind of celebrate your time here, the continuation of these traditions at this university, whether you came from one side of that fence or the other side of that fence. And I know that we all, as we look back on our educational or work careers, think about people who made such a difference in our lives, people who were mentors and role models. And your father was certainly that for so many of us. He certainly was for me. I think he'd be smiling to hear that, and probably quite a number of people in this room as well. But you have talked to him more about advice, because you probably got more advice than any of us have. So Jean, would you talk about the lessons and advice that your dad has imparted to you, because he loves you the most, but as examples to us of what we might think about?
He loves me the most as what, the oldest?
No, you and Juliet. You and Juliet. I'm not singling you out.
So I think a lot of people have gotten advice for him, some as a kid, which certainly is much more difficult to take than being an adult, but it never really wavered. And you've probably picked up the thread and the theme. Part of it is to study and prepare yourself. I think Lincoln was one of the ones who used to use that quote, "Study and prepare yourself, your time will come." He also talked about perseverance. My father used to say that his brothers, Kevin's father and my father are brothers, his brothers were smarter than he was, but he persevered harder than they did.